Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another show of V2T Expert Migration Panel. Today, I have DJ from RestNSX and Tuan from NSBU. Why don't we start with quick introductions? Since I am no expert, I'll start with mine. My name is Victor Monga. I am a VC and TEM based out of LA. I work with this program as a host, so I'll start with DJ's introduction. DJ, go for it.
Great. Thank you very much. DJ Antonucci with RestNSX. I'm one of the co-founders of the company and been here about 4 years. Prior to that was within the NSBU on the sales side of things. And myself and my partner, Johnny Bailey, left about 3 years ago, and started our own company to focus on NSX management, operations, and V2T migrations.
So Tuan Nguyen, so Victor just mentioned, right? So from NSBU technologies team, so we work with a lot of customers, understand the needs and how we solve the problem, how to migrate people from V to T is a main focus for us for this year. Thanks.
Great. I think this session, we want to focus on a couple of things. One, obviously, we want to share the success stories that RestNSX has gathered since we have started working on the migration. And obviously, we want to walk the talk. At the end, we want to talk about the demo and how it actually does the magic. So, DJ, why don't we start with the quick introductions about the success stories, and then I have a couple of questions that I can ask you away. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I think the most important thing to start off with is why NSX-T and why now from our perspective. So, from our perspective in our interactions with customers, partners, PSO, VMware in general, is that there's a few driving factors right now. One of them being now that the whole NVDS, VDS thing has been settled with T and people can be more comfortable just moving over to VDS, that is a huge driver. We hear this time and time again is that NVDS having to convert all their hosts over in Phoenix was a pain and monumental effort. So now that that's out of the way, we're seeing the adoption of T take off. The other one, really in no particular order after that, is scalability. As we all know, T scales a whole lot better with clustering, federation, all those great features that V never had and NSX-T is delivering upon. The third one is IDS IPS, which is obviously not available in NSX-V, only available in T. We're starting to see customers who were traditionally not NSX customers coming over from other third-party companies to using NSX because of features like IDS IPS built into the fabric and not bolt-ons. The next one is multi-vCenter support, which really ties back to the scalability of NSX-T. The fact that you can have multiple vCenters in T, people really seem to like without having a limitation of one-to-one in NSX-V. And last but certainly not least is obviously the inevitable support timeline for NSX-V coming sometime next year out there. So there's definitely that factor as well.
The thing is great, right? But I can ask a question a little bit on a high level of scaling. The use case, why people cares a lot about NSX-T, because they already have an V in their environment in production, right? So what is the main use case, more or less, you see to drive the motivation people move to T? Is this a container support, multi-cloud support, or anything you can think of? What the use case you see the most?
Yeah, good question. So from an actual use case perspective is definitely containers is a big one. We're working with a lot of MSPs out there who are doing multi-tenancy and really adopting container strategies for their tenants. So obviously in that being tied natively into T is a very, very powerful. So a container story, multi-cloud, especially as clouds become more nimble in the sense of being able to move workloads between them, that has definitely driven the adoption as well. So from a product portfolio perspective, I always like to talk about stories and solutions and how we're solving customer problems. But we need to lay the foundation of what we provide. So RestNSX as a company has two main product lines. One is RestNSX, obviously the name of our company, and REST is kind of RESTful APIs, because we do everything via API. And that product is focused on a few different things. It's a manager of managers, it's operational tools, it's troubleshooting tools and reporting all together in one. But there's a lot of features within there to help us prep for this transition over to NSX-T that we'll cover on the next slide. Then we have another platform called MAT, Migration Assistance Tool. This is, again, another standalone application. Both are OVAs. Install them, get them up and running about 5 minutes. And its goal in life is transitioning from NSX-V to NSX-T. using what's known as a lift and shift strategy. So as everyone out there is probably aware, there's three main approaches you can take if going to NSX-T. You could use the built-in migration coordinator, which is, in some such situations, it's a great tool. It's free. You can use it. If it works for you, great. In other circumstances, it doesn't work, and that's where customers will typically, build greenfield, script it themselves. Or the third bucket where we fall in is what's called a lift and shift strategy, where we are building the NSX-T environment in parallel with the V, and customers can migrate workloads, policy over time. It's not a in-place upgrade like a migration coordinator type migration out there. So with that said, the RestNSX architecture is important to understand because it really lays the foundation of what's possible. So as I mentioned, RestNSX is that manager of managers for operations and everything. And it doesn't matter if you're running NSX-V, T, a container, cloud instance, it's all consumed via API. So you could deploy NSX using our platform, you can maintain it using our platform, but you can also do a lot of things that aren't even possible within NSX or any other tool out there. So for example, as it relates to NSX-V to T, when you install RestNSX in the environment, we can do three main things. One is optimizations, and this is what we call stale rule and stale object analysis. So before we move to NSX-T, we want to look at the environment, say what rules could be removed, what objects could be removed before migrating to T, because there's no reason to migrate junk over to NSX-T if it's not in use. Because we know firewall rules over time become kind of like Swiss cheese. No one really cleans them up. Admins leave and go, and upgrades occur over time. And you could have a bunch of rules that you never even know you need. So optimizations is key. The second one is synchronization. So for our larger customers and some of our smaller ones that are going to migrate over time, there's no native way to synchronize NSX-V and T once you've done this migration. So maybe I have some workloads residing on V and some who have moved over to T and they need to communicate. Well, I could maintain both environments from a DFW perspective, or I could do some sort of synchronization. That's where RestNSX comes into play. We'll talk about that more. Then the third one is reporting. Definitely an undervalued aspect of RestNSX because we can provide runbooks, which is essentially a configuration runbook, kind of like RV tools, if you will, but a really elegant version of it that gives you a lot of NSX-centric data. So how many logical switches do I have? Are they universal? Are they global? How many tags are in use? So real data that I can use for documenting my environment. And it just doesn't stop there, where not only are we converting, NSX-V to NSX-T, some built-in tools to RestNSX can also convert third-party firewalls over. So for example, I could take a Palo Alto or a Cisco ASA, bring it into RestNSX, and we will convert it over to NSX-T objects, firewall policies, edge policy, whatever you want to do in there. So it's just not V to T, it's also a lot of different tools to get T deployed for customers who are currently V, not V, third party, or even Verni integration. So vRealize Network Insight, awesome tool. And we integrate with it via API, like all these other platforms, to be able to create policy via point and click. So if I have a new application I'm standing up on NSX-T or a container workload, I need to map out kind of like NSXi and figure out what flows are talking to what and create policy out of it. We integrate natively on there. So let's transition over to MAT, Migration Assistance Tool. And this is, like RestNSX, it's an OVA. And I want to highlight a few important points of really, why us, right? I highlighted those different strategies you have out there for moving to V, moving from V to T. But really, here are the high points from our solution. So we already covered lift and shift, which is essentially meaning we're going to mirror your V configuration in NSX-T and not touch your existing V production workload. So it's running, it's doing what it needs to do, and you move hosts over to NSX-T at your pace. It's an automated migration. What we mean by that is it's a 4-step process from a actual mirroring the configuration over there. That's what we define as defining your data sources, which we'll do in our demo, collect the information, review our recommendations, and then actually do this migration, all via point and click. There's no scripting or UI work that you really need to do. A very important aspect is that we also support selective migrations. So for example, if I want to only copy SDN over to NSX-T, I can uncheck microsec, or vice versa. Or maybe I want to be very selective and say that I only want to copy these set of firewall rules and objects over. We can do that on there. And when we do that in the lift and shift strategy, it's non-destructive. Because remember, we're making a mirror copy, putting it in our database, manipulating the data to make it compatible with T, and pushing it to NSX-T, which brings up two very important aspects, is that a lot of our customers, especially on the large size, have a lot of V managers. So for example, I could take up to 12 V managers, vManager or vCenter pairs, and migrate them all to a single NSX-T manager out there. So that's what we call many-to-one consolidation out there. Because back to the other point, I was talking about scalability. T scales so much higher than V that people want to consolidate their different administration domains out there. Another very important concept is the ability to transform incompatible objects. So for example, let's say we have a customer who uses vCenter objects in their firewalls, a cluster, a VNIC, folder, whatever it may be, that NSX-V you could use in a rule set. NSX-T has limited constraints in terms of what you can use in a rule set. That's very intentional because it wants to be very intent-based and mobile between different clouds. So if I use traditionally NSX or vCenter objects, I can't be really mobile with that policy. But T addresses that great because we're abstracted out to just NS groups with tagging policies, whatever it is. But there's that incompatibility between V and T for those customers who leverage those vCenter objects in the past. So if I have a vCenter object, let's say a cluster in a firewall or a naked VM in a firewall, and I want to migrate to NSX-T, traditionally you would have to remediate that, meaning convert it over to an IP set or do something. We will take care of that for you. And that's what we call auto detection and transformation out there. So, and the last thing I'll cover on this slide before we really start getting to the use cases is that we have a lot of exciting announcements in terms of how you can get to our software, and our solution is that our partner program is growing every day. A lot of VMware partners out there use our products in their service delivery. You can also buy the MAT tool and RestNSX as a license. And we also are in partnership with PSO for them to use our products in their service delivery, and also us as a PSO subcontractor, in case you want our assistance along those lines. So with that said, I'm going to transition over to the first success story.
No clarification. I think there's a lot of plethora of features and things that our customers can definitely leverage through MAD. One thing I was going to say for the customers that who are concerned about or who just care about their current environment and don't want to go through the whole upgrade process of ESXi, can they leverage MAT and still be able to transition to NSX-T?
Got it. That's a great transition to this customer success story. So this customer success story is one of three that we're going to cover. This one is on the smaller side, right? Only a few hundred firewall rules, IP sets, etc. But two very important things about this. This was for a European bank, and this was done in conjunction with PSO. So PSO did the architecture, the delivery of NSX-T, got it all ready in terms of just the basic spin up, and then brought in our tools to do the optimizations and then the actual V to T migration. Two very important aspects is that one, it did not require them to do an ESXi upgrade, which was very important to them in terms of migrating to NSX-T. They were able to stay on 6.5, and I think since then they have migrated to 6.7. Along the same lines is that it was done in a 4-day window. So we're talking about project kickoff, build, and migration all within that. In terms of the actual time it took to copy over or mirror using the lift and shift strategy between V and T, it was a 20-minute migration. So in that 20 minutes, we did the collection against NSX-V, analyzed everything that needed to be transformed or changed because make it compatible with T, produced a report, which we call assessment report, gave it to the customer, and then they validated it, and we clicked begin migration, and sat back and watched the MAT tool do its things. So very powerful story from a teaming perspective with VMware, a customer impact of getting them onto NSX-T very, very fast, and also a customer impact of minimizing the changes required moving to NSX-T.
Great. Yeah, that does sound like something that someone who needs a quick win, this is the way to go. So
Yep.
For larger customers who have hundreds of hosts, and for them, it's not that quick, right? They can't just convert that into 2 hours or in 2 days. For them, they might have to keep it for a longer period, let's say a month. at that delta time when they are not fully transitioned to T, but they still have to maintain V while transitioning to T. How does that work? The sync between V to T, does MAT help with that as well?
Yeah, great question. So this is really highlighting what we would consider a medium to large from a security perspective, load balancers, ESGs, where this customer had that exact use case. It was going to be a month and a half migration for them to be able to get from V to T in terms of moving hosts, doing upgrades, validation, all that. And in that time, they didn't want to maintain V and T from a policy perspective. So what we were able to do is to really, with this partner intelligence and PSO and the customer, to get them to NSX-T as quickly as possible through this lift and shift strategy, but leveraging a feature in MAT called Zero Trust. What Zero Trust allows you to do is that we will inject temporary IP sets in NSX-V and NSX-T so that no matter where the VMs roam, because maybe you're using dynamic criteria in a security group that does not translate into T until the workload is over there, that you may have black holing of traffic, you may have permitting of traffic that you may not otherwise want because the policy doesn't really reflect T yet because it relies upon local inventory. And doing this and having those temporary IP sets on there, that VM can roam between V and T and move hosts over at your own pace. But to solve the problem of incremental updates, RestNSX, not MAT specifically, uses a policy engine that allows you to define NSX-V sections and NSX-T sections that you want to map together. So during this migration, we have the temporary IP sets in place in V and T, and within RestNSX, I can simply have my process be that every time I make a change, I would do it in NSX-V, and we will detect that and push the delta to NSX-T. So I don't have to, as a user, update both. I don't have to worry about where VMs reside. So very, very powerful use case. Along that lines, this particular customer had a lot of things that migration coordinator very specifically could not do. It had special characters and object names, blank rule names. It had a lot of different things. At the time, they also had a few sections with over 1,000 rules. And NSX-T, the limit is 1,000 rules per section. So our logic would break it up into multiple sections. The list goes on and on. The idea here is that it was a medium to large migration, complex. You could see 210 load balancers, and the MAT tool handled it very elegantly from that perspective. We had probably 3 or 4 weeks of planning time where we did mock migrations, which brings out another aspect of RestNSX in the MAT tool, is that we can do these mock migrations because it's a lift and shift and not impact NSX-V because we're making mirror copies. Try the migration out, see how it looks, move over a host, try things. If it doesn't work, we roll it back to the previous state. So you can really try out your migration at your own pace.
It seems that's a large customer, right? How 2,000 IP sets and ton of rules in here. So before you do migration, you need to do the assessment, right? And after that, you need to make sure if all of the rules or some of the rules need to be excluded from data. And that kind of thing, you need time to do the conversation with the customer as well, right?
Exactly right. Great question. And the typical process is that we work with our partners directly with the customer, where we install the MAT tool and the RestNSX tool in assessment mode. In assessment mode, we are generating all that data you mentioned, right? How many firewall rules, how many things we need to consider and migrate to, what's supported, what's not supported. And it gives you a very nice, concise report of data that you can build out in the lab and mock up whatever you want to do. But also in that time frame, you can run things like a rule analyzer, object analyzer to look for those stale objects I was talking about earlier. So I would say, the first week of a customer like this is that you're looking at that data that we've automated. So there's no manuals filling out spreadsheets. There's no doing a Power CLI script to get information on running RV tools. You can use all that data, but it's not required because we make it point and click. It says generate assessment report, which I'll show you here in a minute, and gives you all the data to start the design discussions with your customer.
Great. But if most of customer or a lot, they all use not only NSX, they tie with all the system, right? vCloud Director, VCF, vCloud Foundation, they have VIO, they have RV, they have multiple things. How you make sure that nothing breaks after we migrate in NSX. Well, that's great, but no want to break any systems associated with that as well. How we make sure that not happen?
That's a great question. That's really where good, strong engineers and architects come into play, in my opinion. So we're not trying to say that you have our tool, press the button, you're on NSX-T. There still has to be a strong engineering effort, due diligence of what the customer has. So for example, if they have, VCD, right? That's an environment where you probably should use the VCD migration coordinator because it's obviously part of the tool set, but also the fact that VCD requires certain ownership of objects, right? It doesn't like third parties creating objects and taking ownership of them. So that's one example. VCF, we've had tremendous success along those lines because, under the skin, it's, NSX-T just with, a manager in front of it. So to answer your question, it really depends on the customer, but what we're seeing so far is that majority of customers are using, VRA or tools like that where a lift and shift strategy will not interfere with the migration. The third use case or customer success story is with a partner called 27 Virtual. They run a lot of the Ninja programs. And this was just one example. We have multiple of these going with all different partners out there. But this was a relatively smaller customer, a few hundred firewall rules. And they did some math on manually creating this because they couldn't use Migration Coordinator because of the secondary NSX-V managers. And so a direct quote from them is that, it took about 15 minutes to move a few hundred firewall rules between V and T. It was point and click, and they validated things, and we were off to the races out there. So this was a quick win, small company within the state of Florida, but very, very successful. Customers happy because it was done so quickly out there. From a life cycle approach, I think, Tuan, this really answers your question, which maybe I should have started off with, which is we have that pre-migration phase, which we call step one. That's when we're looking at those optimizations, the consultation with the customer of what other products they may have in the environment that we need to account for, and taking all those things into account. The second step is the actual migration, right? Try things out. Let's do a mock migration between V and T using our strategy. And then what we have a post-migration task. So these are tasks that we could not do during migration. So for example, the VM inventory may not be an NSX-T yet because I haven't moved any hosts over. So therefore, we can't add VMs into NS groups or attach security tags to VMs until the inventory is available at the NSX-T. And you can interconnect using HCX or other technologies within here, create a layer 2 bridge to make this as quick and seamless as possible. But as soon as the inventory shows up on NSX-T, we can do the reassociations and take care of the things we couldn't do on that migration. The last step, which is obviously optional, if things don't work out or you're just doing a mock migration, you roll back and we bring NSX-T back to its original state. And like I mentioned before, I want to reiterate is that during this whole cycle, we have not modified NSX-V unless there are some pre-migration optimizations that we would want to do with the customer.